Hey guys, so today Victoria and I are going to talk about the physiology of supersonic muscles, specifically in rattlesnakes.
We plan on discussing several things about the rattlesnake's supersonic muscles today, starting off with what they actually are by definition, discussing other animals that can possess a similar quality, the actual anatomy of the supersonic muscles and how they rattle within the tail, the main function of the muscles and the main function of the tail, and finally, the ongoing research within the field of the rattlesnakes and supersonic muscles.
Okay, so we have a couple interactive questions for you guys throughout this presentation. So before we go and give you the definition ourselves, why don't you guys take a moment or two to think of what a supersonic muscle actually is?
So, supersonic muscles could also be known or called as shaker muscles. These muscles are physiologically specialized to sustain high frequency contractions for long periods of time, resulting in the shaking of the tail. Supersonic muscles are what provide the rattle of what we hear when we see a rattlesnake. There are many muscles that make up this supersonic ability, and most are composed of single major fiber type, which contains large numbers of small myofibrils, abundant sarcoplasmic reticulums, numerous mitochondria, and large deposits of glycogen.
So here's another interactive question to think about before going on to the next slide. Do any of you guys know an organism other than the rattlesnake that can possess this supersonic muscle action?
There are actually other animals/organisms that possess this supersonic muscle ability. Obviously, the most common and most known is the rattlesnake, as well as the hummingbird. But there are insects such as flies, wasps, bees, and beetles that possess muscles similar to shaker muscles, and they're called asynchronous flight muscles. These muscles are not synchronized with individual nerve action potentials like the supersonic muscles are, but instead they typically produce many oscillating contractions for each action potential. Each contraction produces the wing beat. These muscles will provide the insects with a great amount of agility, a fast response time when seeing predators, and the ability to fly away in milliseconds, unlike the rattlesnake, where the muscles are only localized to the tail end of the animal.
So this diagram is just displaying the example of a fly's asynchronous flight muscles and how it's actually able to move. So as you can see in the diagram, there are labels indicating where to locate the vertical muscles and the longitudinal muscles.
Now we are going to get into the tail morphology of the diamondback rattlesnake, and it's not as confusing as it may seem. A study done by Savitsky and Moon in 2008 tells us that there are three main muscles that are responsible for the fast vibratory motion of the tail, and they are the longimus dorsi, the iliocostalis, and the supracostalis lateralis. There are also several smaller, deeper muscles underneath the three main muscles that I just mentioned. They are the multifidus, the spinalis, the interarticularis inferior, and the levator costae. Now, of these deep inner muscles, only the interarticularis inferior and the levator costae are large enough to contribute substantially to the rattling. The others are so small and so close to the mid-sagittal axis that their contribution, if any, is minimal. Although the shaker muscles extend for most of the length of the tail, they produce movement primarily in the rattle, whereas the remainder of the claudial vertebral column remains relatively motionless. And there are actually no muscles within the rattle of the rattlesnake. It's all in the tail.
So this diagram is showing different views of the vibratory muscles mentioned previously in the previous slide, but in a western diamondback rattlesnake. So the top one is a dorsal view, the middle one is showing the left lateral view, and the bottom one is displaying the ventral view. If you look at the right end of each tail, you can also see the rattles in each view as well.
So this image is showing the cross-sectional view of the muscles seen within the tail end of the snake. As previously mentioned, we can see the three main muscles that are primarily responsible for the supersonic movement of the rattle. And just distal to those muscles, we can see the smaller, deeper muscles that were also mentioned. Now, if the shaker muscles on one side of the tail contract, then so do the muscles on the other side, which is what causes the supersonic ability.
So we have one last interactive question for you guys. Does anyone know the main function of the rattlesnake's tail?
So there are many main functions about the tail of the rattlesnake, but the most well known would be that the rattle is generally assumed to function as a warning to enemies about the rattlesnake's venomness. There is also the main function based on the physiology of the rattle and the tail. So, the rattle is shaken at very high frequencies by the supersonic muscles that are attached to the claudial vertebrae, and these muscles are able to sustain high-frequency contractions for minutes to hours without fatiguing. The muscles often operate at frequencies exceeding 100 Hz, making them the fastest vertebral muscles. Like other vertebral muscles, these sonic muscles are synchronous, and this means that the calcium is being released and concealed by the sarcoplasmic reticulum during each of the contraction cycles that is produced. The rattlesnake in particular produces a complex side-to-side and twisting movements of the rattle that help reduce the cost of rattling.
As well as the main functions that Victoria had mentioned on the previous slide, rattlesnakes also use their rattling abilities as a protection mechanism for the possibility of any surrounding predators. So the rattling of their tail allows surrounding predators to become aware of bites that contain their very poisonous venom. Other species use this process as well. For example, monarch butterflies, specifically the Danis plexippus, signals their toxic chemicals. Wasps will signal their painful stings, and skunks will signal their smelly sprays. These processes are called aposematic signals. So this means the organism will use certain defenses, such as being poisonous or unpalatable, which means not appealing to taste, so not being of interest to their predators. And they do this to ensure that they can prevent themselves from being attacked by their predators. Some other forms of aposematic signals include things such as using primary visuals, so using bright colors or high contrast patterns such as stripes.
And here we have included a small video showing what is actually inside the rattle of the rattlesnake.
If you're hiking pretty much anywhere in the US, this is one sound you don't want to hear. The warning of a rattlesnake. Now, just because a rattlesnake's tail sounds like a built-in maraca doesn't mean it works like one. There are no beads rattling about in here. So what's really going on inside? If you opened up a rattlesnake's rattle and shook it, absolutely nothing would fall out. After all,
so rattlesnake rattles are hollow?
That's herpetologist Tim Colston. He says the secret to that rattling sound comes from the shell itself. It's made of keratin, the same hard substance as your fingernails. The keratin is arranged in a chain of interlocking rings, which are hooked together by tiny grooves along their edge. Now watch what happens to those rings when Colston shakes the rattle.
Whenever I shake them very fast, they bump together, producing the sound.
Because the rattle is hollow inside, sound waves can bounce off the walls and echo, the same way shouting in a cave amplifies the sound. And the bigger the cave, or hollow rings in this case, the more amplification, so the louder the rattle. But a big hollow chamber can't get the job done on its own. That's where the tail muscles come in. Rattlesnakes are equipped with 3 powerful shaker muscles at the base of their spine. Those can contract so fast, they vibrate the rattle up to 90 times a second. For comparison, the human eye blinks 15 to 20 times a minute. By vibrating so quickly, the rattle makes a sound that hits between these specific frequencies.
So now I'm just going to briefly discuss some research on the overall topic of our presentation. Although we couldn't find any relevant research studies that are currently ongoing, we did find an interesting study from 1994. This study was done by Patrick Cook, Matthew Rowe, and Wayne Van Devender. It was conducted to determine if there were any interspecific differences among the rattling sounds of rattlesnakes. So the researchers analyzed the rattling sounds of 194 rattlesnake individuals of 21 different species. Their results were able to demonstrate that the rattlesnake's rattling sounds can be heavily influenced by their body size as well as by the type of species that the snake is. The results also led them to the determination that the removal of the interspecific differences among the different species resulted in significantly different rattling sounds among each of the species, except for a pygmy rattlesnake called Cistrus malarius. And an example of this snake is shown in the two pictures of this slide. The researchers inferred the species differed in the rattling sounds due to the adjustment to its body size. This allowed the species to produce a rattling sound that was a lot quieter and higher pitched than the other species that were also tested. Another significant conclusion made from this study was that the size of the snake's rattle also had a huge determination in the level of sound that was produced. Victoria and I found this study quite interesting since it was able to show how different the sound of a simple rattle can be among different snake species. And here is our references page. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed our presentation and leave some interesting questions below.
Thank you.